This is Villain for All Seasons. I'm Ben.
I'm down.
Hey everybody, this is Villain for All Seasons. Today we're speaking to Zaid Jilani. Zaid Jilani is a former reporter at The Intercept, previously worked for Think Progress, United Republic, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Alternet, and now he runs a Substack called The American Saga. It's a great conversation. Hope you enjoy. Zaid, I just wanted to jump right in and ask you, do you think Pete Hegseth is being targeted by the deep state?
Oh, well, it's whatever's going on over there is I think it's truly fascinating because I think when Hegseth came in, I think a lot of people expected that he have kind of a rocky tenure, right? I mean, he's never run a large organization like this. The Pentagon's actually, I think, the largest workforce in the federal government, might be one of the largest workforces in the world. And, he had certainly had an experience as a veteran, U.S. military. He had been through the cable news circuit. He had worked in nonprofits, but he had never really managed an organization like this. And I think, watching so many staff departures, people being suspended, moving to other parts of the Pentagon, of DoD, seeing these leak investigations, and then obviously the Signal chat kind of scandal, the first one being that they were discussing war plans on Signal with a number of people, including a journalist accidentally invited. That part probably wasn't Hegseth's fault. But then also this latest shoot and drop, which is that he had also discussed things with his own personal family, that could have been sensitive. I mean, to me, it points to a lot of sort of incompetence at the top. And, as far as whether he's also being, sort of pointed at or targeted by a larger sort of power struggle within the administration, I mean, it's possible. I think some of his staff who were suspended and who had left the Pentagon, including Dan Caldwell, who's his close aide, who recently, I think this past week, went on Tucker. I think that there is somewhat of a power struggle behind the scenes, right? I think some of the people who are more skeptical of towards war with Iran were some of the people who were suspended. But the other question would be, why wasn't Hegseth defending those people? He's the one who runs the department, right? He's the one who does the hiring and firing. So like, what's going on beyond there? I mean, it might just be kind of a matter of things getting kind of out of his control, him not being able, one, to attain basic competency, but two, also maybe to be maneuvering these power struggles that are happening behind the scenes, which is, I think, a difficult thing if you've never been in government or never even been in large organizations.
My favorite take from Twitter was that he was going to release the Benghazi files, and that's why they had to get rid of him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that when it comes to Trump in particular, I mean, I think Trump really wants to surround himself with people this time who he feels are loyal to him, right? I think in the first term, he felt like he was being stymied all the time by people at his DOJ, by the guy who ran DOD then, Jim Mattis, and General Jim Mattis, by all these folks. And so I think when Trump looked around to people who he felt like he was comfortable with, yeah, Fox News hosts are sort of the talent side, right? Not the reporters, but like the opinion hosts were towards the top of the list, right? These are people who he always enjoyed kind of having a rapport with when he was president and even when he wasn't president in between his terms. And I think that's why he ended up picking these folks that are around him right now. I mean, think about how many Fox alumni or cable news alumni are in the administration, right? I mean, Dr. Oz, right? Another kind of celebrity doctor is running
Yeah.
another cabinet level position, so on and so forth. So I think for Trump, he was comfortable with this set of people, but may not necessarily be the set of skills that you need in government.
Zaid, I wanted to follow up on the deep state question. Is there anything that Hegseth is doing or Trump is doing that would lead him to believe that the deep state would be targeting him? I promise not all my
Yeah, I
questions are
mean,
about the deep state.
I think that no, no, no. I mean, I think that I think when Trump came in, they're kind of like bull in a china shop, right? They are going through a lot of these kind of permanent, almost legacy organizations in government, clearing them out. Elon was doing a lot of that with his team and group of people. I don't know how much he'll be doing that going forward, but like, doing things like radically downsizing USAID, rocking up to the line, eliminating it, right? Like USAID is a soft power tool. Voice of America is a soft power tool. I do think that like people in CIA or people in intelligence agencies are probably quite upset, like legacy people, not people hired by Trump, political appointees, but people who've been there for a long time, probably are quite upset about these things. I don't know what their countermeasures would be like, though. I don't know what they could actually do about it. I think in many ways, because Trump has appointed loyalists to all the senior positions in the government, I don't know if they can kind of jam up the works for him as much as maybe they would have if he hadn't done that. And maybe that's part of why he's doing it, right? He feels like by mass firing civil servants, he's going to have a more loyal group of people around him, or at least that might be how it was sold to Trump, right? I mean, I don't think Trump is super particular about details. So there may be some internal government backlash to some extent. And then I also think, like with the issue I mentioned earlier with the Iran issue, there are people in the GOP who I think were very uncomfortable with Trump elevating people like his personal friend, Steve Witkoff, into these negotiations. If you'll notice, Witkoff is kind of handling this whole file. It's not being handled by Marco Rubio. It's not being handled by the Senate appointed people or by senior diplomats. You know, it is kind of Trump taking in his own inner circle. And I think they're probably frustrated by that, the Hawks and the GOP, and they probably would like to try to get rid of someone like Witkoff, but it's hard because like he's been Trump's friend for like 20 plus years, I think. And he's also like a billionaire, so he kind of has a few money. He doesn't really care that much about the flack he gets. So yeah, there probably is some kind of internal dispute within the government and within the GOP about all this. But honestly, I think most of it you can chalk it up to incompetence. I think managing is not something everybody can do. Being diplomatic is not something everybody can do. I especially don't think it's something Pete Hegseth has any history of doing. And yeah, when you step on a bunch of toes, you got to be willing to say sorry. And I don't know that that's a very common skill in the administration. So
It's hard to take any of those criticisms of like the deep states going after him because that's become over the last like 10 years just shorthand for something Trump didn't work out. So it must have
right.
been. But if anything was going to do it, probably USAID.
Well, it's the boy who cried wolf problem, right? I think Trump
Yeah.
turned that into every single thing that he does that doesn't go well. It's because the deep state or the media or the Democrats or someone, foiled it for him. It was never his fault, right? So
Hmm.
in the event where it might actually kind of not be his fault, it's going to be hard for him to prove his case given his rhetoric, I think, since he was first president. So
Zaid, you mentioned really the kind of the pullback on soft power, getting rid of Voice of America, and this is kind of been linked to, in some sense, like kind of neutering the power of the CIA. Do you think that is his objective, or do you think he's just going to use more like strong arm tactics with intelligence agencies like the CIA?
yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because I think something that's kind of unique about Trump is I feel like he and his administration really do exist within like a social media feedback loop, right? Because I think they distrust so much of mainstream media and such an antagonistic relationship with a lot of the like old school formal sources of information that they may actually believe a lot of what like Elon was posting during all this, right? Which is that USAID was largely in existence to promote left-wing social values, to help the Democrats and their worldview in the United States and around the globe, and that by curtailing it and reining it in, that we're actually helping America because it was undermining America. Or just like I think with Trump with the tariffs, right? Like his administration, like Stephen Miller, has argued that like the reason there aren't many American cars sold in Japan has to be because of unfair trade policy. They have an embargo on our cars. I mean, there is no embargo on American cars, and I'm pretty sure there's no tariff on passenger cars at all going to Japan, right? Like they don't buy American cars because they have probably the most successful auto companies in the world in Japan, and they have
Better
some
cars, yeah.
loyalty and patriotism with them, right? Like, but I feel like they create their own feedback loops where like they really think that like, okay, these countries are ripping us off. USAID is ripping us off. Voice of America was left-wing propaganda, right? And like they don't 100% understand that what they're doing is actually reducing American like global power and influence by doing these things. I don't think they 100% understand that like a lot of places that USAID moves out of, China will move into, right? And like China will have much more of a presence in Africa. China will have much more of a presence in Latin America, right? Parts of Asia, right? Like that's not really like a factor to them because they just think USAID is wasting money, harming America, promoting left-wing social values, blah, 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 right? And like if you have that point of view, you don't really see a contradiction in what you're doing because, Trump's always talking about how we're getting taken advantage of by the whole world and like nobody fears us and so on and so forth. But like these were tools that we used, right, to convince people to be on our side and things. But this time around, he seems to have been convinced by, I would argue, probably a lot of the exact same content we see going around in kind of the Trumposphere and right-wing social media, which is this that no, actually, by dismantling all this, we're empowering America because it really intended to undermine us. So.
You mentioned Elon a little bit earlier, and do you think that, well, you basically kind of suggested that he might have a more minimized role moving forward. Do you think that's true?
Right. Yeah, I think that for Elon, when his engagement in politics up until now, he had always been somewhat involved, right? Like during the Obama administration, he had a pretty good relationship with Obama, I think, because Obama was helping support the green tech industry that he was in. SpaceX was was getting off the ground. Like all these things like were really good for Elon, and he would kind of stay in the background. He wouldn't comment directly on politics all that much. He was mostly talking about his companies and nerd stuff and that kind of thing. I think Elon got like very political probably around 2021 or 2, and I don't think he was used to having such a spotlight on him in this way, right? I think he had a pretty good relationship with media when they were just covering Tesla and SpaceX and Neuralink and so on and so forth. And I honestly think it probably has taken a psychic toll on him. Like he probably does feel like he's a politician without necessarily getting all the benefits of being a politician, since he's not actually in an elected office, he's kind of serving at Trump's whim. And his companies are suffering. I mean, I think particularly globally. I mean, in the United States a little bit, but globally, like in Europe, his EV company Tesla has seen something like a 30% drop in sales, right, year over year. A third drop in sales is like dramatic for a company, and that is happening as EV sales overall were expanding, right? So other companies were not seeing a similar drop, right? And I think at some level, Elon has to be thinking like, look, is it worth it? Like I spent my life, living on the factory floor building this company, and now because I got so political, my company is suffering, right? My empire is suffering. And like maybe I should at least take a reduced role. And I think that the reporting that suggests that he will do that within the next few months probably is correct. But on the other hand, I think the other thing working against this is that Elon does have a social media addiction, right? And I think the
Yeah.
social media addiction maybe is doing more to harm his companies than his actual like behavior in the government. Because I think it's not just what he does, but it's how he does it, right? It's how he expresses himself. It's the things he engages with, his kind of very frantic and frenetic posting that's often very much like Trump's posting in a way, because like he just up at all hours of day, responding to
Hmm.
this, saying that. I think there's probably pressure on him to step back. Probably will start coming from Trump as well, because Trump sees him as somewhat of a liability at times. But yeah, it's hard to say. But if I had to guess, he probably will reduce his role a little bit.
Do you think we can expect some kind of mea culpa about everything?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's possible that if Trump like completely flamed out, that would happen, because then Elon would just be like, I got to cut ties with this, and like I got to go back to just being like the tech guy, and But if that doesn't happen, I don't know if it's in his interest to do that, because Trump is kind of like his lifeline, right? Like MAGA is kind of his lifeline. That is his fan base now. I think a lot of the Democrats who are buying his consumer products like Starlink or like Tesla, they have just kind of been holding their noses and doing it, right? I don't know that they're going to welcome him back into like, okay, you are on Team Democrat again, because it's not really where he feels comfortable anymore. I feel like his persona has been so shifted to the other direction, to where I think probably the best thing for him to do if he did want to cut ties, just to get less political, right? Start posting 100% of the time about his companies again, like he used to, or like, video games or one of his hobbies or something, right? And just kind of recede into the background, because then, he can hope that people just forget his political presence, right? Like, or it recedes in people's minds. So,
Probably his best play.
Yeah, and like the attention span and historical knowledge about these things seem to to not last too long. If Elon actually does have a more minimized role in the administration, do you expect Doge to continue cuts without his, I guess, face attached?
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is like Russ Vought and the OMB, the budget director at in Trump's administration is very ideological, and his agenda is very much aligned with, I think, what Musk was trying to do in terms of retire everybody now, or whatever the acronym they used to tell each other, where they wanted to dramatically cut the civil service and reduce the presence of the federal government in many areas while strengthening it in a few areas where they have ideological goals. Like I think that will continue, and Elon will be less and less of a face of it either way. So which kind of makes the case for Trump to also try to reduce ties with Elon, right? Because he can have someone who like nobody in the world actually knows, right? And who doesn't like post on social media constantly and have very divisive and polarizing fan base do the same things, right? So that's also a possibility for him.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to move on a little bit to something else that you posted. I was trying to find right before this interview to share with Ben, but it was that video of, I forgot who tweeted it, but someone saying Trump was the first Jewish president.
Oh yeah, this was who was that? Who said, I don't remember who said it was that he was the first Jewish president, but I think this might have been in his first term, and it was a video that was posted later. But yeah, someone did say that. I feel like Trump almost views the world like Archie Bunker does through like very crude stereotypes and like, you can take that by the things he says, but like, at times during the campaign in 24, he would be very upset that most Jewish people were not voting for him. And most Jewish people didn't vote for him. I think like 70% probably voted Democrat. And so I think he'd be just like, kind of taken aback. And like his argument is always like, well, look, I'm the best president for Israel. I'm so great for Israel. So why are you guys betraying, your own people, that kind of thing? Because that's like his crude stereotypical view of the world. Whereas like your average Jewish voter does care more about Israel than the average voter in America, probably for obvious reasons, cultural, religious ties, ethnic ties. But at the same time, like their voting behavior is largely based on like domestic issues. So like, if Trump really wanted that vote, he would have to be like, more, like more of a Democrat, right? Like himself, right? Had to be more pro-choice, had to be more supportive of Democratic Party's social, political, economic agenda. And then I think, maybe Jews would feel more comfortable going in that direction because I don't think, most Jewish people are not super comfortable voting for someone who's branded as very anti-immigration, who's branded, who's in a political party with a lot of Christian right folks who are against abortion, even though Trump himself moderated a little bit on the issue during the election in a savvy way. I think those are the issues that really guide the vote. But Trump just thinks it's Israel, and part of that is like he probably forms that impression by the Jews who did vote for him, right? Because I think like some of the right-wing Jewish organizations, like the Republican Jewish coalition, like the RJC, like they actually are like Israel probably is their number one issue, and that probably is the only thing they come up to him and talk to him about, right? Like they don't talk to him about the range of issues that American Jews care about because like that's what the right-wing Jewish organizations and donors that give to Trump do care about. So in a way, maybe in his mind, he rationalizes it like, yeah, that's exactly what they're always talking to me about. Like, why don't these other Jews care about
Yeah.
that? But I don't know. That's Trump's worldview.
Miriam Adelson is his benchmark for what Jews think about.
Yeah, I think so because I think the person who helped draft the executive order on anti-Semitism, he had mentioned that she had played some role in that. He, when he had an interview afterwards, and he had brought her up on occasion. And I think that for Trump, a mega donor obviously is very important to him, right? She was one of the largest donors during the campaign. The other one was obviously Elon Musk, right? And Elon Musk took a very major role in the campaign because I think that, Trump is not super ideological, right? Like I don't think he cares that much about the Middle East or any of that as a from his heart or anything, right? But he does have a transactional attitude about it, which is like, okay, like this part of my coalition really likes me. They hate the Democrats. They hate what's happening in college campuses. They don't like, all this. And so what can I do for them, right? And I think part of what he's doing for them is trying to place limits on funding to colleges, trying to deport some students here on student visas, but also some permanent legal residents on green cards. And he sees it as a pretty costless way to pay these people back, to kind of tip his hat to them, say, look, you're in my coalition now. This is what I can do for you. It's probably a much less cost-free thing than, much more cost-free thing than, like a war with Iran or something, right? Something that Trump is probably averse to because he sees that as generating all kinds of problems for himself and for the United States. But he doesn't necessarily see it with these colleges. And the other part of it is like a lot of Republicans just don't like colleges in general, right? They think they're all like liberal bastions. They're hostile to the right. So yeah, screw him anyway, right? So it's kind of like a perfect storm for him. He doesn't really see a downside to it. He's certainly not someone who's ideological about freedom of expression or due process or any of those things, right? He doesn't really care about that. So yeah, I mean, everything's kind of aligned for him to kind of pursue that agenda in that way.
Just to talk about Iran real quick, I know that I think it was on Sunday, news broke that the Trump administration basically stopped Netanyahu's idea about, or they wanted to stop Israel from bombing Iran's nuclear sites, I believe. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I think that the leak that went to the New York Times almost certainly is from the Trump administration because it had very intimate details about what they were doing, not really so much the Israeli side. And wouldn't make that much sense for the Israelis to leak it to them either. Didn't really go well for them. But it probably had two purposes. One would be they want to show Iran, look, Israel really is thinking about attacking you. Like this is a real thing. It's not just something we're BSing about when we negotiate with you. Like, they really are thinking about it. Here's how detailed it was. And then the second thing is probably a message to Israel, which is like, look, we really want to make this deal work. And we're telling the whole world that we prefer that to the alternative that you guys presented us. Right. So it's kind of probably a message to both countries. It was a little bit of a threat to Iran, like, look what could happen. But also it was like probably a little bit of a poke at Israel, which is like, look, like you tell us all this because you think we're just going to do it for you. Like, you guys start a war with Iran, we're just going to come running and help you. Not necessarily, right? Like if we're telling the whole world that like we're not down for this right now. And honestly, it was probably kind of a savvy move for the administration to put all that into the New York Times. I don't think it's a publication they're very happy with most of the time. I don't think it's their natural instinct to go and court them and leak to them and develop a relationship, but they knew where to go to put it in front of the whole world, and I think they found success in doing that. So
Seems
I,
like a good thing to do for the base too, right? With all the questions about who really controls Washington, especially like
mm.
from the Biden administration into now. That's what I got from it too, is kind of to appease the parts of MAGA who are not so pro-Israel.
Yeah, I mean, if you'll notice, Tucker out of the blue, like a month ago, Tucker Carlson, he wrote a social media post on X where he was like, look, this would be a huge disaster to have this war, blah, blah, blah. I'm guessing that someone in the administration has been talking to Tucker ongoing about all this as well. It's not clear who or why they're talking to him, but Tucker does represent exactly that wing you described, right? Which is the group of people who are very worried or concerned that neoconservatives have a retrenched kind of influence over Trump and the administration, and that the departure from the Bush wing that they had hoped Trump represented was not really going to happen. And yeah, I think even if most voters probably not that super concerned with foreign policy, which I don't think they are, there is definitely a wing of MAGA that is very vocal and has a platform. Like, Trump is someone who like calls Tucker every now and then and just like rants to him on the phone. This is what I've heard, right? Like just like talks to him like he cares what he thinks about things, right? And if
Yeah.
Tucker turns on him, it would matter a lot to him, right? Like he would be very upset about it, right? So like you're absolutely right that there's also going to be some coalitional management happening here. I think that's probably part of why they are doing the university crackdown so hard, so Trump can have something to present to the other side of things, right? And tell them, look how pro-Israel I am. I'm not even going to let them, protest on campus, and we're going to try to get rid of all of that, right? Is that going to satisfy that group of people? I don't think so. I think they're still going to
No.
want something with Iran, but
Yeah.
he is managing all these people. So
How far do you think Trump is going to take the campus crackdowns? And do you think, for example, like the cases of like Mahmoud Khalil and etc., are going to be successful?
yeah, I mean it's a really good question because the government does have some latitude when it comes to deporting people on visas. When it comes to green cards, it's a little bit different. I think that with green cards, which was the case with Khalil, which was the case with another young man who they recently slated for deportation, usually there will be a court process for that. And that will go all over. And I don't even know if it would go up. It's the kind of thing that would go up through Supreme Court. But like that's almost the more interesting part because revoking someone's green card is usually like, like commit some kind of crime or something, which they haven't really alleged any crimes in these cases. And they have tried to cite a very ancient law and basically argue that by expressing certain points of view, these people have undermined American foreign policy. Now, how many people have actually ever been sanctioned or punished under that law? I don't know. It might be something that you'd have to like go back to the Red Scare to find examples, right? So I think it'll be very interesting to see how that works its way out through in court. Because it's kind of like the stuff they did with El Salvador, right? When it comes to deporting like the other migrants, not for speech, but like, claiming they're an illegal entry and blah, blah, blah. A lot of this will go work through courts. It'll work through maybe all the way through the Supreme Court. And then it's like, I think what they did with El Salvador is the administration kind of was like, well, we are complying with the Supreme Court order. They didn't tell us to bring him back. They just told us, if he happens to show up at the border, we'll let him in again, right? Like that is kind of their way to defy the courts without admitting they're defying the courts. And I'm curious if that's what ends up happening here as well. And then we could end up with an issue where it's not just like, a free speech case about a student at some college, but like an actual constitutional like crisis, right? Like how does the administration relate to the courts and what can they do? Because I think that if they are successful in the first few months of this, like first 6 months of administration, what they'd be doing a couple of years from now would probably be radically different, right? Like if they're successful with this, I could see them in the future trying to denaturalize citizens. I mean, I think that's something that Stephen Miller has wanted to do in the past, has floated to do. Which, by the way, I think the only way you could denaturalize someone who has been naturalized is by like they lied on their, citizenship application or like they did something wrong in the process, right? But if they have these legal victories now, then in the future they can be like, well, by holding these points of view and doing these things, they're violating our law, and we can't give citizenship to someone who violated the law to take it away from them, right? Like so, like it could go to a pretty extreme direction if they score enough legal victories now, or if they just like refuse to abide by them, which I don't know to what extent they can do that. I don't know how the courts would respond to that, but Yeah, I think, I think one thing that libertarians always make this argument about slippery slopes. I mean, I think this is an area where that's a very valid argument, right? Like you establish a precedent for doing something that's unprecedented. Once the precedent's there, it's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal when you're doing it to five more people or 10 more people or 15 more people, right? Like, I don't know who the first person was that they sent directly to that prison in El Salvador, but now it's like we expect them to do that, right? They're just going to keep sending more and more people there. I think Trump told Bukele to build five more prisons. And he's talked about sending US citizens there, right? Which that has not happened yet. But I guarantee you that if it happens to one person, it won't be that big of a deal if they do it to 500 more, right? Like they have to establish a precedent and then it's a slippery slope from there. So,
I think that's a
Yeah,
great segue into Abrego Garcia, but yeah, go ahead, Ben.
oh yeah, I agree, and I always urge people to think back to Obama after the Bush years and with the war on terror and all of these, these rights and these measures were, kind of instated under the Bush administration, and then what happens? Obama comes in and does the same. So I feel like the slippery slope thing is not only like possible, but I think to your point, if it keeps going, it's only going to get worse.
one of the questions about all this is like something I've wondered about, which is like normally when Republicans are asked about something that Trump does that they don't approve of, they find some way to dodge the question or get around it. And Tim Burchett, who's a Republican congressman from Tennessee, was asked about what Trump said about how he would even like to send American citizens to that prison in El Salvador, who he thinks are like bad criminals and all this. And Burchett said something like, well, I wouldn't want Trump running my Sunday school, my kid's Sunday school, but I think he's a great president, right? And it's funny, like, did Burchett even hear the question when he said that? Like, or is it just like the stock response that he has to anything crazy Trump says? Like, because people are used to Trump saying something offensive or juvenile or so on and so forth. So they say that. They say, like, look, he doesn't have good manners. And I don't think we should emulate his manners, but he's a great president, right? He's doing the right things. Because that's not really like a manners question, right? It's a policy question. It's a legal question, even a constitutional question. American citizens really cannot be exiled to another country. You have to strip them of their citizenship to do that. It cannot be taken away. It would violate, various amendments, the Bill of Rights and Constitution. But it is a matter of like, yeah, like if Trump succeeds in moving the debate to like, I've already done this to these people. It's normal now. We're just going to keep doing it. Public outrage will subside. A legal precedent will be there. Any critics in the Republican Party will be like, oh, we're just used to this now. Yeah, it'll shift the entire thing in that direction, which is why, like, I talk to people about Abrego Garcia, which is this case where they made an administrative error to deport someone to El Salvador who had a judicial kind of order of protection in the United States, right? So they said, like, you can't deport him right now, even though he's not from here, but like, you saw his case going and all that. A lot of people are like, well, look, maybe he's a member of MS-13. People have alleged this, although no one's proven it. People have alleged he's guilty of some kind of domestic abuse or something against his wife also has not been convicted in court of. But they're saying like, this guy's probably a bad guy. Like 50-50, he's a bad guy. Like, who cares, right? And I think like, Chris Van Hollen, who was the Maryland senator who went to El Salvador to meet with him. This guy's from Maryland. He lives in Maryland. The guy who was deported. He was saying something like, I'm not defending the guy. I'm defending our constitutional process, right? I'm defending the law, right? Because like, if you find success in saying you can deport someone on accident, right, who the court said didn't actually, had a right to be here for now, then you could do it to 10 more people. You can do it to 15 more people. Maybe you can take it a step further, maybe you can do it to a US citizen, right? Like, particularly the precedent of when the court tells the president they got to bring the guy back and they're just not doing it, right? You could have a Supreme Court decision about Girl Scout cookies and the president could ignore that, right? And I would still think it would be a big deal because you're ignoring a Supreme Court decision, right? You're eroding the separation of powers and checks and balances, right? That principle is a lot more important than any particular case, right? The particular case is there and people will discuss it, but the principle being established is very important because that will govern all future cases, right? And the next person may not, maybe the next person will be more sympathetic, but the principle will have already been established, right? So you can't do much about it. So,
well, on that note, I think we'd be remiss to not ask you about your little tete-a-tete with sitting Vice President J.D. Vance on this subject. I don't know, we just wanted to ask you about the substance of it. And also for me personally, is it odd to be speaking back and forth via Twitter with the Vice President?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that something I've noticed about Vance, since he was a senator, actually before he was a senator, when he had written Hillbilly Elegy, he is someone who enjoys I think he very much has like a millennial's approach to politics. He is a millennial, and he kind of, he reads a lot. He reads a lot of political banter. He enjoys watching it. He enjoys the comedy, the jokes, the memes online. And I think he could even tell you, like, if you asked him to map out like the factions on like Twitter, he could probably map out all the online political factions on Twitter. Because if you'll notice, the people he engaged with on that topic were me, my friend Leighton Woodhouse, my friend Jesse Single. He largely engaged with people who are known to be kind of critical of this approach, but also kind of like open-minded to talking to people on the right or kind of interested in it. He didn't engage with like hardcore, like, super partisan Democrats or anything. And I think that was intentional, right? Like he feels like this is a kind of a good faith discussion. This is kind of like people who are kind of like in the middle about a lot of these things. So like we need to I need to navigate this with them and show that I'm a good faith actor, that I can defend myself in my position. And I think that in general is how he engages. Now, sometimes he does just like open, a can on someone and like completely like, well, he didn't do that to me though, right? He like was respectful enough. I think he strawmanned me a little bit, but like whatever. I think what he sees his role in the administration to be, because vice president doesn't really have a ton of formal power, right? Like they will vote in the Senate when there's a tiebreaker opportunity. He had to do that for some of the Trump nominees to the cabinet. So like he'll do that. He'll talk to Trump, he'll help with some staffing decisions, but he doesn't have the formal power, right? Trump is making a lot of formal calls. And I think for Vance, he's kind of like the resident like pundit, right? Like, he's the intellectual who will go there and argue the case and get into the nitty-gritty and the weeds in ways that I think Republicans don't like to do, right? I think a lot of the administration, like if you show them like a critical news story, they'll just be like, that's the evil left-wing media saying X, X, Y, Z, and like screw them, right? Whereas Vance will be like write like 800 words about like, why they're wrong. And like, here's like all the history about why they're wrong. And like, like, because that's what he sees his role in this administration to be. And I think it's really interesting that he is a millennial and he's doing that, because I don't think that's something that, and not the stereotype, but most older politicians would not want to do something like that. It's like, it's not there, what they've grown up in and seeing. But I think when it comes to Vance, like he had a blog when he was in school. He was actually my friend's college roommate at Yale. He's a friend of mine who I went to University of Georgia with. He later went to Yale Law School, and he was JD's roommate. And like he's always enjoyed being like a political banter guy or a social political banter guy. And I think now he's just doing it from a much bigger platform, right? And I honestly don't think it's like a strategy. Like I don't think like he's like, okay, they're all meeting in the Oval Office or in a cabinet meeting, and they're like, okay, JD, you got to go out and defend this. Like I think he just wants to do it. Comes across as somewhat impulsive, but also like he's putting thought into what he's actually writing. And he's doing it. And I don't think Trump minds it. I mean, Trump's quite a poster himself. He's not an intellectual. He's not going to argue with people or debate things, but he's also a poster, right? So next to him, I don't think anything Vance is doing is inappropriate. The only way it could end up being inappropriate is if Vance ends up tweeting his way into an entirely new position in the administration, which so far he has not done. He's not deviated from policy or from Trump in any way. He seems disciplined in that way. But yeah, he is going to string himself out in these arguments, and I appreciate it. I mean, I hope he continues to do it with people, because it gives them it gives all of us a little bit of feeling like they're not 100% just closed off to critics, right? They will engage a little bit, right? And Vance will engage. But yeah, some of the other members of the administration, I don't know. I kind of feel like they don't respond to anything in like a meaningful way. They're just like, like Stephen Miller, just like everyone's a terrorist. Like everyone deported to El Salvador is just a terrorist, right? Like he's not gonna go into more detail than that. So
Do you think that pays off for Vance in the long term? I mean, obviously, if he stays disciplined with the messaging, doesn't get ousted from the Trump camp, obviously he has greater ambitions, either,
yeah,
going on to sit in the big job. Like, what's
yeah.
your sense of the MAGA base? Do you think that plays to them, or do you think it matters?
I think that it's a good question, because politics, I would say, since Obama left office, it really doesn't matter if the president's an intellectual, and it hasn't been about that, right? Like neither Biden nor Trump nor Kamala Harris or any of these people really sold themselves as intellectuals or engaged in that way. And maybe that was just the way politics was going. But like in 2028, if you had a JD Vance versus like Pete Buttigieg presidential race or something like that,
Ugh.
right? I could very much see like those two like every day on Twitter dropping 800 word essays against each other, right? Like would that change the political environment in America? I think it probably would if both parties kind of wanted to be that and do that. hasn't been that way recently. Like, I really don't think we've had a smart president since Obama, or someone who could, like, I don't know, tell you what his favorite books are, his favorite philosopher is, explain like how he came to his beliefs in detail, right? Like that's something that JD Vance could do. It's something I think Pete Buttigieg could do. It's something I think John Ossoff, one of my senators, could do. But it kind of depends on like parties agreeing to be that way again, right? I think the last race we had like that in American history was maybe Obama versus Romney, although I think Romney was kind of dumbing himself down for like the because politics was becoming that way when he was there. But yeah, I mean, I would find it interesting. It's the kind of, I'm a educated person. I also like to just read political banter, read philosophy, read books. It would appeal to me. How the rest of the country would see it, would it like make us smarter about politics? I would hope so. But I think it would require both parties to kind of come to that conclusion that they want to be that and to bring people like that and put them at the leadership positions, make them presidential nominees at the same time, which hasn't been the case for quite some time. So
Do you think that would be a move back to, again, something more like the Obama versus Romney? Or do you think that Vance is going to continue kind of like the politics of grievance that Trump has really, found a lot of
yeah,
fuel
well,
in?
well, that's exactly the thing, which is like I think that Vance, in my view, he's probably one of the smarter people who's ever been in that position. He just the trajectory that he's been on, right, from where he started in life to going through Ohio State, going to the Marines, going to Yale, getting elected to the Senate, getting elected to the vice presidency, doing so even uphill in much of it the time because he used to be a Trump critic, as we all know, right? He did not really like the man, but he was still able to win Trump and his family over and get the vice presidency. Despite like how talented and smart he is, I think he is very much in that Trump grievance mold. He does break with it more than Trump does. I mean, it's not a super high bar, but like, for instance, Vance put out a very conciliatory message about Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, after someone tried to burn his house down, right? I don't think Trump did that. Or if Trump did that, it was probably like in a very pithy message along with a bunch of other stuff. But like Vance is someone who can kind of turn it off for a second and be like, okay, like that's messed up. I want to just let you know that, we don't think that's right. And we want to put you in our prayers. He did something very similar when he was debating Tim Walz at the VP debate, right? Like Walz revealed that I think he had a classmate or friend who had witnessed a school shooting. So Vance like paused the debate for a second, just like, man, I didn't know that about you. I'm so sorry to hear that. But like, you can't see Donald Trump doing that, right? Like, it's like just not the way he's molded his personality, and he doesn't seem willing to change. Vance is young enough to where he can change in that way. So like at the same time, though, like Vance's politics now are very grievance based, right? Like I don't think he's being really all that political in these arguments about immigration online. Like I think he's really bought into it. I think he's very much like radicalized his thinking about it. And I think that's the way he would govern, right? Like I think he would, in some ways, he maybe be even more no limits than Trump would, right? Because Trump is like, he's mostly a transactional guy. He's not like, he will go no limits against someone like if he feels like they're in his way or something. But it's not like he has these ideological goals he's trying to pursue every single day of his life and that he won't be satisfied unless, he's able to enact a certain philosophy. Whereas Vance, I actually think is like that. I think that Vance I think he's floated before, like ignoring court rulings, right? I don't know what Trump will end up doing about the Supreme Court ruling with Abrego Garcia, but I feel like Vance would just ignore it, right? Like, so in that way, he would be maybe even more willing to go further on behalf of his grievances than Trump would. But I think they'd be more ideological grievances. And in some ways, it's more high-minded, but in other ways, it may be more extreme because he won't have Trump will be like fighting with the president of Mexico one day, and the next day he'll have a phone call with her and be like, "She's the nicest person in the world. I just love her." Right? Vance would not be like that, right? Like if Vance was angry at the government of Mexico for something, he wasn't going to get persuaded by one phone call and become best friends with them again, right? Because he's not like doing a business deal. He's like pursuing an ideological goal, right? He has a philosophy or a movement that he's trying to herald and bring to some kind of fruition. So I think, yeah, so it'd be a little bit of a mix, I think, but I do think it would be a little bit more intellectual, just because, like, I don't know, Biden and Trump are not the most engaging, intelligent, book smart type people. I think both of them have very good street smarts. They have enough emotional intelligence to get elected president for good reason, but they are not, they weren't the kind of like heady intellectual president that Obama or Bill Clinton were. Whereas I think Vance is kind of in that mold.
I keep laughing about this internally because, famously some of the old Twitter posts from Vance came up with that he used to listen to Death Cab. And
Yeah.
making it like kind of emotional that he couldn't get over like the transactional one phone call with the president of Mexico. But something that Ben talks about a lot, so I'm going to steal this question from him, is that do you think that Trump wants Vance to be the torchbearer for MAGA after him? Because we don't think so.
Yeah, it's a really good question because he was asked directly about that, and he was like, "Well, there's a lot of people who could run, and it wasn't like a ringing endorsement, right? Because it's possible that like Trump Jr. would want to run, or like like Trump wants to build a dynasty, right? And like I think the one of the few things in life that Trump actually likes is his children, right? Like he has a very monarchical view of them, right? Like like they're my lineage, they're my legacy. I love them, and I want them to carry things on. So it's possible then that, he wouldn't want Vance to be a shoe-in because he's going to leave that door open. Now, who knows if they want to do it? Who knows if Trump Jr. or someone like that wants to do it? I think for a while they wanted Lara Trump to be a senator from Florida. Like, I think he probably does have that in the back of his mind. I mean, he likes JD. He doesn't dislike him at all. Like I think he has a good relationship with him, but I think you guys are right that he doesn't necessarily want to make him the next president right now. But that being said, I remember that Trump's campaign team was interviewed after the election. Politico asked them, and for them, they were like, "It's no question in our mind, it's going to be JD next, right?" And there are reasons beyond, whatever Trump's feelings are to believe that. Usually, when a vice president runs for a presidential nomination, like right after, it's just like a clinch. Like, there's no one who can beat them. There's no one who's competitive against them, right? It just tends to be how it is in American politics. Now, if someone else with the Trump name, like Trump Jr. ran, that might throw a wrench in that, right? But I don't see like Marco Rubio or Ron DeSantis or anyone defeating Vance. I think by the end of 4 years, because Vance has been so loyal to Trump, it'll be just like Biden with Obama, right? Like a lot of the voters will be like, he stood by our guy that whole time. All those people were coming after him, and he was with our guy. Like we're loyal to him now, right? And I think that if Vance goes for it, he probably will be the presidential nominee. I give it like a 70-30 chance. With the only people who I could see beating him would be if one of the other Trump family members really wants to do it and Trump pushes them forward himself. But
Who would you choose out of the Trump family?
uh, I think Trump Jr. is the one who would be most likely to do it. He's the one who's most engaged in politics day to day. I think some of the other Trump family kind of keeps their distance. They're doing other things, but I feel like Trump Jr. would be the one who'd want to step up and do it if anyone did it because he seems the most in sync with his dad and the most in sync with politics day to day.
I'm surprised that
You
there's
think
been
he's smart enough?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just a lot of it depends on what he wants. I have no idea what he wants to do.
Yeah.
I do think JD wants to do it. I think he's thirsty for it. Like he's gotten a taste of power through the past few years, getting elected to the Senate, being in the vice presidency, and he really believes in like certain things need to happen in the country. I think he'd go for it. There would be like zero reason not to do it, other than if he has some kind of health crisis or family crisis or something unforeseen. But I think he would want to do it.
I'm surprised in this administration, or well, this term rather, the pullback of Ivanka, because she was so prominent in the first term. Are you surprised by this?
Could you elaborate a little bit? Like,
I feel like she was such a presence in that 2016 to 2020.
mm,
I think she was at the White House. I don't think I've seen a photo of her
hmm
at the White House at all. I have not,
yeah.
nor have I seen Melania at the White House either. I mean, it's been less than 100 days, so
Yeah, I think that there is a certain level of like, okay, in the first term, a lot of the like MAGA base did not like Jared and Ivanka, right?
mhm.
Like they
Yeah.
felt like they were kind of like the Democrats in the administration. They had pushed Trump to do like First Step Act, which was criminal justice reform. They had pushed for a softer line on immigration. They didn't like them. And I think Kushner made a decision not to return to the administration in a formal way in this particular outing of it, right? And because of that, Ivanka's also there less often. And yeah, I think that there's going to be less of a presence in this administration, particularly when it's the more like loyalist, more like everybody's aligned, everyone's going forward type of administration and setup. So I think that, yeah, I wouldn't read into it as like a personal thing, like, Trump is just personally distant from Jared and Ivanka. But I just think as soon as he made the decision not to return in a like governance capacity, that was going to be how it was going to be. I think and it aligns with the rest of the administration being just much more like, true MAGA or like, loyal MAGA this time around and not having someone in the room to kind of pump the brakes. And I think as Jared often did, try to bring them back towards the center on a couple things.
We were talking right before you jumped on Do you think that Trump really learned from the mistakes of the first administration? Because he seems much more effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing you might notice is that there's like no generals in his in his cabinet or in his administration, really. And in the first term, he had so many generals, right? He hired like generals to everything. His defense secretaries, security advisors. Like, I think he learned a lesson from that. He probably got in his mind thinking, look, some of these people who are kind of who have been senior in the government before their other administrations have their own agendas. They feel they can kind of like stand up to me and kind of, rebuke or remove my engagement on certain things. I think that doing the loyalist thing has kind of enabled him to be like kind of on autopilot in terms of the speed they're moving on certain things, right? It means that, so I'll give you an example. Like Trump really wanted to leave Afghanistan his first term, but like he would usually be talked out of it, or like the Pentagon would slow walk their plan to do it, or like drawing down from Syria as well. And I think this time around, that's not going to be the case, right? Like if when Trump says something, that's the party line, right? And everyone is super aligned on it. I mean, you even saw his with the tariffs, right? As Trump eventually changed his mind on a lot of the tariffs, but as soon as he laid down the line, I think people in the administration who were naturally predisposed to opposing tariffs, who spent their lives opposing those types of policies, they would go on the CNBC, they'd go on the Fox, and they would turn into a completely different person, right? They'd be talking about how, the world does not revolve around cheap goods, how we need to have manufacturing in America and factories in America and the world's ripping us off. These people had never said anything like that before, right? That was not really in their history to be talking like that. But Trump, I think, got the alignment he wanted this time in terms of when he makes his mind up on something, people are going to be 100% shoulder to shoulder behind him on that. And I think that's part of the effectiveness, but it has a downside, which is the downside is that I think the Trump administration is less likely to realize when they err or when they make a mistake. I think the Hegseth thing is part of that, right? I think a lot of people saw Hegseth would be a problem going into the administration because of his lack of experience, because of, his personal behavior, whether it's like alcohol addiction or adultery and so on and so forth. And I think that there weren't a ton of people around Trump to just be like, dude, like he maybe just pick someone who has a little bit more experience, who doesn't have all these personal foibles, and then maybe we can get this across the finish line, right? That's kind of the downside of some. The upside for him would be he's able to actually move quickly on a bunch of different things. The downside would be he's not. I don't think he's really seeing the blind spots as much this time. So
Speaking of ideology, how would you rate the Democrats' performance so far in opposing Trump and coming up with some kind of counterpoint to what Trump has really put forward?
yeah, I mean, look, I think that the Democrats have been in a weird place because I think they understood that Trump came in a little bit more popular than he did last time, right? There was more consensus around him because he won the popular vote, decent margin in electoral college. There were certain issues like immigration where I think that Biden was just so deep in the hole where like you had to see a bunch of Democrats vote for Lincoln Riley Act. Um, and because of that, there was a little bit more engagement with the Trump administration. There weren't people calling him illegitimate. There wasn't a Russiagate style conspiracy. But I think in the past couple months, the Democrats have turned more oppositional because I think Trump has started to kind of run into roadblocks, right? There started to be like high profile cases of incompetence, high profile cases of potentially like stretching constitutional limits and abusing government power. And they're kind of feeling their way into like what the oppositional message is to him, right? Like I think some of them, I think they were most comfortable with the economy because everything Trump was doing around tariffs was highly like, chaotic. And I think a lot of, the markets were responding a certain way and people who weren't normally political were paying attention and getting very pessimistic. But I think also like, even immigration, like immigration has been an issue where I think right before the election, almost nobody in America, thought the Democrats had the correct approach in immigration, right? Like Biden had lost much of his own party on that issue in terms of the voters, and a lot of independents swung against him on this issue. It was probably I live in a swing state, so I think that was the number one top issue that Trump sent me commercial. The campaign sent me commercials about was immigration, yeah, even more so than inflation and the economy. And I think that's starting to change now. Trump's advantage on immigration has narrowed because they've gone too far too fast. And I think that they are not able to calibrate their response, right? So I think I would say probably by the summer, we're going to see the Democratic Party be in a much more like oppositional mode than they had been the first few months, simply because I think Trump has gotten very unmoored from the center on a lot of things, right? Like I think what we were talking about earlier in terms of how he's surrounded with loyalists or moving very fast and effectively, it also means that they're not able to properly position themselves at times where on issues where like the public wasn't on the Democrat side, but they didn't really want to go to the other extreme. And when you see things like, law-abiding immigrants, pathways getting cut off, when you see things like potentially new inflation shocks as a consequence of tariffs or uncertainty, I do think that Trump's approval ratings will go back to kind of what they were in the first term. They already are kind of getting there. And this will create an environment where the Democrats will end up being maybe as oppositional as they were in the first term. Now, there hasn't been an impeachment effort, but we're like 3, 4 months into the administration, so why would there be impeachment at this point? But it's potential that we could see that again if we see the same kind of high profile scandals as in the first term.
So does he need a war to bump up
Yeah, no, that's a really
popularity?
good question. A war can boost your numbers. It can also depress your numbers, right? And I kind of think that's the fight within the GOP, right? Like Tucker would argue to Trump that it would be the end of his presidency to have a large Iraq style war like with Iran, right? Whereas, other people may be telling him, look, Bush got reelected after he started the Iraq war. The war rallies the country around the flag, rallies the country around you, right? So it could go either way. I think Trump in general has leaned against that theory that wars are good for your ratings or that wars are good for your presidency because of his experience with Bush, right? Like he was very much soured on the Bush administration after the Iraq War, and he felt like it was dragging them down politically. And he also used that issue when he ran for president the first time against Jeb Bush, Bush's brother. He understood kind of the political toxicity of it, right? So Trump probably leans a little bit more in that direction, but it's also like a desperation move, right? Like if economy sours, if you really can't talk about immigration that much anymore, if the border's kind of quiet and Americans are not as freaked out about it as they were under Biden, then yeah, he may just press that button thinking that he needs something to get out of this. So
I really like to follow your Twitter just because I never know what I'm going to get. I feel like it's there's not partisan politics on it really. So I just want to talk a little bit about your background and how you your career and really how you came to your whatever political leanings you really have. And if you
yeah,
love
I mean,
Sonoma Sunshine as much as your profile.
I do love it. And in fact, I watched it. I watched it actually before it ever hit theaters officially because I went to like a test screening of it, right? And ever since that test screening of the movie, I have loved it. And I've probably seen it like a dozen times or something now. It's the kind of movie you put on once a year where you're like, okay, it's a feel good movie. So I do love it. And I think that's why it stays as my Twitter banner. As to your other question, I mean, look, I think I started working in this space professionally more in a more partisan direction. I worked for a think tank that was aligned with a party. I worked for a political action committee and nonprofits that had certain persuasions and leanings. I do feel like there is some level of, I think around maybe probably 2017, 2018, I started just feeling like I need to be involved in a much more like nonpartisan kind of space in order to be able to tell the kind of stories I feel like are necessary to tell journalistically, or even when I was working in advocacy to be able to do the kind of advocacy work I needed to do. Just because I don't think really one political party or faction had all the answers, as much as maybe some people who are in partisan spaces think they are, right? There's a certain lack of I think there's a certain lack of curiosity you have when you're in a partisan space, and maybe for good reason, right? Like I don't think you can work to be electing someone if you have a lot of nuance about the other person, right? And when I was working campaigns, I had to have as little nuance as possible about it, right? But when I'm not doing that anymore, when I'm just trying to understand things and explain things and write about things, it's best to be in the least partisan space possible. And so that's where I have aspired to be. It doesn't mean you can't be adversarial with the government, but you should be kind of adversarial with everybody if you want to do that, right? And so like I think that's generally been the orientation I've had since.
Love to hear it. Zaid, thank you so
Mhm.
much for your time. I'll definitely send you over a link as soon as we wrap and
Mhm.
yeah, let you know.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. And that was our conversation with Zaid Jilani. Thank you all for listening. This is Villain for All Seasons. Like and subscribe. If it is Buttigieg versus JD Vance for 2028, that is going to be the most boring, tedious bullshit